I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend here on 980 CGME and 650 CKOM. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Hope you had yourself a great week. Thanks a lot for joining us here on the Ralco Radio Network. And we got a great show for you here today. Lots to break down and talk about. Now, last week, we talked about some Real Agri-Study survey data that we had recently completed in July. And we talked about how one of farmers' biggest concerns when it comes to consolidation is consolidation in the ag equipment dealer network. Well, we're going to be joined today by John Schmeiser. He is president of the North American Equipment Dealers Association, and he's going to talk about the why are we seeing consolidation in that part of the sector. So we'll have that. We're also going to hear from Shannon Chant of Saskatchewan Agriculture, and I've got a bit of a theory, okay? You're going to work with me here. I've identified 5 barriers to the intended canola crush expansion that is planned for the Western Canadian prairies. And a lot of that is actually going to happen in Saskatchewan, okay? Viterra, that mega facility in Regina, is just one example. I think there should be reasons for growing concern that is actually going to happen to the full extent that is intended. How much will actually get built? Not quite sure. Anyone's guess. Those companies know. We're seeing in the U.S. some of those plants being canceled, dialed back, all this being driven by renewable diesel and the opportunity there. But I think there's some headwinds. There's some barriers mounting, and we're going to go through them, and I want your feedback on it as well. If you have any feedback at all on anything we discussed or anything that's got you kind of bothered or upset, or maybe you want to make sure your point comes across, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Or, of course, across all the different social media platforms, we are Real Agriculture, or you can call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Yesterday on the RealAg Radio podcast, I happened to have as one of our panelists for the RealAg Issues panel, Cherilyn Jolly Nagel. Many of you know her, and she farms just outside of Mossbank, Saskatchewan with her husband, David. And she provided us with an update on how their crops are. Let's listen to see what she had to say.
I don't have anything good to write home about. We're just in our early seeded durum. There has been some lentils harvested in the area that were seeded first. I'm hearing rumors of them as also okay. Quality is good. I haven't heard any issues around quality. Even the durum is weighing up. So we're feeling good about quality, but it's so dry. It is so dry. As of last night, we got a little bit more. You always get a little bit of a rain during harvest. So we got a 1/2 inch last night and a 1/10 the night before. That won't stop us because it's super windy and it's bright and sunny. So we will be harvesting again shortly after lunch. But yeah, it is very, very dry. And that certainly, sucked the life out of some of the yields.
This is why I think it's going to be so difficult to try to figure out what are some of these production numbers actually going to be in the province of Saskatchewan and really across a big part of Western Canada. Is we just continue to see this deteriorating crop condition. And, heaven forbid if this is when we get the moisture. Like, okay, we don't need it now. We're like going to be combining soon. We need this moisture back in May and June is when we need it. Mother Nature just has her timing all mixed up. We're definitely going to need some in the fall. Post-harvest, whether it's cropland to build those reserves or a reserve, or if it has to do with the grass, we need some moisture in the fall. And it was interesting. I was talking to meteorologist Matt Makins out of the U.S. We were kind of going back and forth through messaging on LinkedIn. And, he described the weather pattern in Western Canada as being very stubborn. It just refuses to break loose of this drought, of this sort of dry bias, locked in on drought. And we know from the likes of the Drew Lerners of the world, as an example, once we lock into drought, it becomes very difficult to break it. And fortunately, we do have some spots in Western Canada that are okay. They are okay. I talked to Jesse Meyer from Woking, Alberta, on the Farm Rapid Fire and RealAg Radio earlier this week, and he has a very good crop. He's underselling how good his crop is. When I chatted with him, it is very good. Okay. You tell me if I'm wrong, but I've heard a lot about some of the crops around Prince Albert, for example, being decent in Saskatchewan. Other areas really, really on what I would call the struggle bus, so to speak. So it definitely a challenge in 2023. But when I talked to Brian Voth of IntelliFarm earlier this week in an interview talking about the markets, and you can find that interview at RealAgriculture.com. Even with the production concerns, he is quite bearish when it comes to the markets. Brian's based out of Manitoba. He feels that farmers shouldn't be necessarily distracted by what they're seeing out their window. Here's what he had to say.
Yeah, the one thing about 2021 is it was just kind of bad across the board. Whereas this year, people have asked, like, oh, well, what does the crop look like? I'm like, well, which side of the road are you looking at?
Yeah, it's variable.
Because, when you look at the patterns of the thunderstorms and the rainstorms that have gone through, the places that have had rain actually look pretty good. And that can be vastly different than the field on the other side of the road or a mile down the road where they got nothing and it's just burnt up. So that's making it really tough. And I've seen other analysts talk about this too. It is making it extremely tough to try and figure out what is an actual average yield. It's hard to figure out an average yield on one farm right now with geographically being spread out. It is super hard to try and figure this out on a Western Canada basis.
Yeah, I think it's an understatement by Brian Roth there of IntelliFarm. It is incredibly hard to figure out what this yield's going to be. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to hear from John Schmeiser. He is the president of the North American Equipment Dealers Association for Canada, and he's going to talk about why we are seeing so much consolidation in the equipment dealer channel, and also, is there more yet to come? You're listening to RealAg on the Weekend here on 980 CGME and 650 CKOM.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola. It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds. If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
And welcome back to RealAg on the Weekend. Last week we were talking about some of the impacts that farmers are feeling in regards to consolidation. Now, one of the sectors where farmers expressed actually the most concern was in consolidation in the equipment dealers network. And we have seen a lot of consolidation over the past number of years. And one of our listeners had some feedback on it, and he joins us right now, and it happens to be John Schmeiser. He is president of the North American Equipment Dealers Association for Canada. Hey, John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shaun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is good. We don't take a lot of callers, so this is great. It's great to chat with you about this topic. So, I think what I wanted to do was get. You represent equipment dealers in your organization in Canada and the U.S., but from a Canadian perspective, why have we seen consolidation? And maybe put it in context, have we seen as much consolidation as some people think?
I think Western Canada was a little bit of the leading or the drivers towards equipment dealership consolidation when you look at other parts of Canada and certainly other parts of the United States. But certainly the United States, I think, has kind of surpassed us now. And but still, when I look back about how the dealership channel has changed, and there's a number of factors that have caused that change, but it really started here in Western Canada, and I think we're not done yet as well, too, Shaun. I think there's going to be more consolidation in the industry, which may not be a positive message received by some of our producers, but that's just the reality of the business and the marketplace and the environment that we're in right now.
And so, what are those drivers? Is it pressure from manufacturers for this to happen? Is it just you have to have scale in based on the cost of the machinery at this point? And where does service fit into this? Talk about some of these factors that are driving this trend.
Well, my experience, Shaun, it hasn't been one factor. It's been a multitude of factors. And the first one is just the consolidation of our farmers. And when you look at the number of farmers that we have in our prairie provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and how they've decreased year after year after year, and they've decreased because the farms have gotten larger and larger. And so when you see our customer base shrinking like it has, you can easily make the leap that do we need as many equipment dealers to serve a declining customer base? So the consolidation of farmers certainly has been a major factor. And I guess a second factor would be it's being driven by the manufacturers as well. And, they look at the customer of today and the customer of the future, and they're trying to determine what that customer of the future is going to need out of their equipment dealership. And so the manufacturers are going to dealers, and these are dealers of all colors, and saying, you need to make major investments in your business, in your dealership, to take care of the customer of the future. So as it's being driven down by the manufacturers, we should see consolidation at the ownership group. That also has contributed to perhaps the number of locations that an ownership group would have, because they may make a decision as we get larger. Is it actually feasible for us to keep a location in our geographical footprint open? And then a third factor is kind of related to the last one, and that's because the equipment has gotten so big, and the facilities that we need to sell and service that equipment has changed as well too. It's really requiring increased capital requirements on the dealer. And so a mom and pop operation is really challenged to have that capital in place to deal with the costing or the value of the trades, the new dollar value on the equipment that's coming out. And so if you're not well capitalized, you're really going to struggle to remain profitable in this organization. And so for a smaller operation, that's something that's always top of mind. Do we have the right capital in place to take care of the customer? And then I think the last thing that is a factor is just the advances in the equipment themselves. Like GPS has really changed our industry for the better. And it's brought that sophistication, it's brought new technology and new products to the market, like the precision ag scope, and it's really reduced a lot of the farm labor. It's really reduced the machine population that is out there. So the equipment dealers that are out there today servicing the customers are selling a lot fewer units in total than we may have been 15, 20, 30 years ago. So I think that has also had a factor into why dealership consolidation makes sense.
Now, in the survey that I was referencing last week, one of the things that regretfully we didn't do, and maybe we'll do it in the future, is asking farmers more detail on why they felt the way that they did. I'm going to make an assumption because when I talk to a lot of farmers and I say, how do you choose who you buy products from, whether that's maybe on seed and chemical from ag retail or from an equipment manufacturer? I think a lot of times on equipment with equipment dealers, it's about the service. And so my assumption would be that there is a fear from farmers that the more consolidation that happens in the dealer network, the harder it is to get, high quality service, or the distance to pick up something like a part during harvest becomes possibly more challenging. Is that fair?
It is fair because as consolidation has taken place, there's also been some locations that have been closed, and theoretically the distance that a customer may have to their dealer has increased. And unfortunately, that's perhaps one of the negatives of consolidation. But at the same time, I think one of the benefits out there is if this dealership is in a multi-store operation and it is well capitalized, their parts inventory within their dealer network could be larger than what a single store could ever supply. So a part that a customer needs may not be at one location within this multi-store complex, but it may be at another. And that is a heck of a lot quicker to get a part from another location within a multi-store dealer network than it would be out of a parts depot out of Regina or a parts depot out of the United States. And you also touched on something that's challenging, to our industry, and that's on the service side. And I think there's an old adage in the business that, we gain the business out front when we sell because of the product that a dealer offers and the specifications and capacity and ability to support a customer's operation. But if we don't take care of them in the back of the dealership, on the service side, that's where we lose them, because we are in a very seasonal nature of the business. We have a window of seeding in the springtime, and we have maybe even a shorter window some years, the wet years, in the fall. And when a machine is down, that customer's depending on our dealers and our mechanics to get out there as quickly as possible. Yes, if the distance from the dealership and the customer has increased, that does add to the time that it takes for us to repair the equipment. But perhaps a bigger issue is a failing of our industry on the mechanic situation. The recent survey that we did with our dealers in Western Canada is that each dealership would take an additional 2 to 3 mechanics per location if they could find them. Okay, so with 400 locations in Western Canada, we're looking anywhere from perhaps 1,000 to 1,200 mechanics that we would take just to fill the existing need that we have right now. And we are working with colleges on increasing enrollment and spaces. Our dealers are investing in training to bring their current people up to speed. Our dealers are investing in their facilities and making their dealerships attractive places to work. So perhaps we can draw mechanics from other industries. And all of that is, just a piece of the puzzle. But perhaps one of the most significant things that could help change our response time as our dealerships grow and consolidation takes place and distance from the farm to the dealership increases, one of the biggest factors that could help would be increased rural broadband. And I say that because every major manufacturer of tractors and combines right now has remote diagnostic capabilities. And if we can remotely diagnose a piece of equipment that's out in the field from the dealership, when an error code comes off, we can get the customer an answer as quickly as possible. And sometimes it may not require the dealership sending out a technician. Maybe it's just an error code that the customer can look at, and with the dealership's remote monitoring, the dealership can advise you don't have to shut down, you can keep going, but at the end of the day, that's maybe something that you should look at. So if we had increased rural broadband, we could really bridge the gap between the customer's expectation on service as to what we're currently able to deliver.
We've been talking to John Schmeiser. He is president of the North American Equipment Dealers Association for Canada. Hey, John, really appreciate you reaching out and rebutting some of the stuff that we chatted about last week here on RealAg on the Weekend. Really appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you so much, Shaun.
We'll be back with more of RealAg on the Weekend here on 980 CGME and 650 CKOM. RealAg Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays will cover a broad range of issues. Thursday we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire. And we'll wrap things up Fridays with the RealAg Issues panel with Kelvin Hepner and Lindsay Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern. And don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
Welcome back to RealAg on the Weekend. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Hey, make sure you go to RealAgriculture.com here over the weekend and check out all of our great content, really covering everything that is happening in the agricultural industry. And also, you can find all of our podcasts by going to Spotify or Apple Podcast and searching Real Agriculture Podcast. Okay, let's get to a topic that I've thought a lot about this week. And that is, you've all heard about renewable diesel. You've all heard about the announcements and the excitement around renewable diesel and the planned growth in domestic canola crush capacity of around 50% from what we have now. Okay, that's being driven by renewable diesel. The opportunity with the clean fuel regulation in Canada, as well as what happens with the RFS in the United States. There's also legislative I guess help when it comes to states like California. I had one person say to me one time that the entire Canadian canola crop of 20 million metric tons could be exported to California to meet some of their requirements. So renewable diesel can create significant demand for soybeans and canola. Canola actually is 3 times the production of oil per acre in comparison to soybeans, which is a pretty staggering number. This is why everyone's very excited about the canola acre in Canada, as well as opportunity for acre growth in the U.S. Now, having said all that, it all sounds great, and everyone's feeling happy about it and very excited. But I think there's reason to maybe take a bit of a pause. What I mean by that is I think there's mounting barriers, some adversity for all of this planned expansion to actually transpire, okay? And I've identified 5 barriers that make up this concern, and I haven't weighted them. I'm not sure which one would necessarily be more of a barrier than another. Probably depending on how you look at it, you could make some of those arguments. I think you add them up, and there is some concerns here, okay? Now, how much of the planned crush capacity that is going to be built, how much of that actually happens, nobody knows. That's time will tell. We do know in the U.S. projects have been pulled or cut back or dialed back. And we haven't seen that in Canada yet, but there's potential here that it may come. So the number one, the first barrier that I identified was the Inflation Reduction Act. Okay, so this is a multi-trillion-dollar piece of U.S. legislation. It's greatly impacting investments in Canada and the U.S. According to McKinsey, the IRA will invest $250 billion in energy, $46 billion in environment, $23 billion in transportation, and $20 billion in agriculture. Now, what I've been hearing from people in the biofuel sector, as well as, say, plant protein sector, as well as other manufacturing, in terms of if you're going to build something, where are you going to build it? It is becoming incredibly difficult for Canadian projects to be justified when we are taking into consideration some of the IRA funding that is available. Okay? I think that this is a problem. If you're going to build a canola crush capacity, new plant, a new canola crush plant, does it get built in southern Saskatchewan or does it get built in North Dakota? That's a thing right now that a lot of different industries are going through. The IRA is essentially as much of a jobs bill as it has anything to do with the environment or fighting inflation. Okay, the second one. Economic slowdown and rising cost of capital. We're hearing a lot about a potential for recession going forward that is up for debate, how significant that's going to be in Canada or the U.S. We've seen interest rates go up quite large if you look back 2-3 years in comparison. And that increases the cost. And we are dealing with very significant, large global companies in some of these plants that will be built. But they still look at things like cost of capital. And internally, there's battles for projects. Do we build a canola crush facility in Canada, or do we build maybe a vegetable processing facility in Europe or in Ukraine or whatever? Those kind of discussions have to happen. There's a battle for capital internally. There's also things like internal hurdle rate that have to be achieved. Those hurdle rates are impacted based on the cost of capital. So the current interest rate environment changes return calculations for some of these projects in comparison to when they were first announced. And additionally, a changing legislative landscape combined with interest rate changes may have shifted the risk profile for some of these investments. The third one, EPA's final rule on 2023, 24, and 25 required volume obligations in the U.S. for things like advanced biofuels. It was disappointing. And there was a lot of concern from the U.S. biofuel lobby that EPA has really put a bit of a cloud over the opportunity, the potential that biofuels like renewable diesel could provide. And it maybe will stifle investment. Well, if there's concern in the U.S. about that, then that also works its way here to Canada. There's no avoiding it because so much of the opportunity of renewable diesel is based on demand coming out of the U.S. and an export opportunity. So the EPA plays a role here, I think, in terms of what happens here from a production side in Canada. But let's come back home for maybe the fourth, and that's canola supply. EPA, when they talked about those volume obligations, they actually talked about concern about feedstock availability. And so that factors into canola supply. There's been a concern since all this planned crush capacity was announced. Canola acres are proving to be capped at about under 23 million acres. 2018 was the peak at 22.8. If you look at the last 10 crops, 2 of them were 16 million metric tons or lower. So 2 out of 10 years, we wouldn't even have met the domestic canola crush capacity if all these plants get built. And if you look at the 23 crop, we may make that 3 out of 11, right? We're not really sure where this crop is going to be at the end of the day. The closer domestic crush capacity is to the production number, the better the basis and competitiveness bids for farmers, which will make them happy. But does it make those plants sustainable? That's a big question. And finally, one that I don't think is getting talked about enough, and that is politicians speaking out against the clean fuel regulation. We can expect strong messaging from the Conservative Party of Canada against the CFR, the clean fuel regulation, which they've dubbed, and Leader Poilievre speaks about this frequently, Trudeau's second carbon tax. And this is going to be messaging leading up to the next election. The louder this messaging gets, without the Conservatives explaining the nuance of whether they are pro-biofuel or not, the greater the risk is for the investment to actually happen at the end of the day. We've already seen Premier Scott Moe of Saskatchewan and the premiers of Atlantic provinces speak out against the CFR in parallel with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Premier Moe talked about how the July 1st implementation of the CFR needs to be delayed. It ended up not being delayed, but that was his argument. The irony is that one could argue without a clean fuel regulation, a CFR-like policy, the intended canola crush capacity expansion in Saskatchewan would be much more tempered. Without a laid-out CFR replacement, if and when the Conservatives form government, the political risk in Canada could force the new plants to be built in the U.S., scaled back, or not done at all. I think this is a real concern. So these are the barriers, okay? What I would like is what you think about it. Do you think I've nailed them? Do you think that there's some that are missed? Do you think at the end of the day it won't matter because the plants are going to get built regardless because this is where the canola actually is? I would love your thoughts. I would love your opinions on it and your perspectives. And I think in all of this, I really believe that on that last point, the political risk, that is the one that creates the uncertainty. Because if somebody's going to commit $600 million, I don't care how big of a corporation you are. I don't care how much cash you have sitting on the sidelines. I don't care what the cost of capital is. If you deem that there's political risk and the political tide could possibly be changing and the next government's policy is potentially significantly different than the current government's policy, that's a reason to pump the brakes. That is a reason to pump the brakes. And that's what my concern is on this. Now, is the CFR the answer the way it's currently written? I'm not sure. I don't know. I've heard a lot of complaints about how complex it is. But I think the Conservatives do need to decide if they are going to be, they need to state, we are pro-biofuels, so we think we can do it a different way, or are we just going to stick to this very, very simplistic mantra of the clean fuel regulation in its entirety is a second carbon tax, and therefore making Canadians believe that biofuels are also bad as a part of that. That's really what I think is really going to be up for debate here and need to be ironed out for sure. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to finish up, do some agronomics with Shannon and Chant of Saskatchewan Agriculture. Right after this, you're listening to RealAg on the weekend here on 980 CGME and 650 CKOM.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Smith of RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern for The Agronomists, Canada's only live, interactive, agronomy-based show. Each week, we answer your most pressing questions with a rotating panel of agronomists, researchers, and extension staff from across Canada. Join me Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, or head to realagriculture.com/live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
The next generation is the future of agriculture, but how do we launch from one role to leading? From succession planning and family dynamics to understanding finances and making the tough calls to discovering paths others have taken all through agriculture, the Successors Podcast covers it all. Tune in with me, your host, Kara Oosterhuis, simply by searching The Successors on your favorite podcast platform, or you can find it by visiting www.realagriculture.com.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
I really want to make it clear. In the prior segment, we were just talking about the barriers to this canola crush capacity being built and happening. I really hope it does. I think there is a massive opportunity for the canola acre and biofuels in Western Canada. I know some of you not super pro biofuel. I feel that it is another way to create demand for ag commodities. We've seen this in the U.S. with the RFS and corn and ethanol. And before you say to me, hey, I don't think we should legislate demand, what do you think the RFS is in the U.S.? You think it just sort of, the ethanol industry just magically appeared? Of course not. Okay? I hope it happens. Otherwise, if these plants don't get built and the renewable diesel plants aren't a part of it in Canada, all we're going to do is export raw canola to the U.S., get it crushed and produced into renewable diesel in North Dakota and Montana, and then we're going to buy the renewable diesel back. And wouldn't that be a typical Canadian story? So we have an opportunity here to really move up the chain, so to speak, produce the renewable diesel, then export it to the U.S., keep here what we need. It's a huge, huge growth and export opportunity. Okay, and obviously the meal is going to have to find its way to places like China, but there's a major opportunity here, and I hope Canada seizes it. But we're going to have to, at some point, read into some of the nuances of what we're talking about when we get into some of these discussions. Okay, let's move on to agronomics. At a recent field day just outside of Swift Current, Kara Oosterhuis of RealAgriculture had a chance to talk to Shannon Chant of Saskatchewan Ag. Here's the conversation.
Kara Oosterhuis here with RealAgriculture.com. I am here today at Swift Current, Saskatchewan, and I have here with me Shannon Chant, who is the crop extension specialist with Sask Ag. How's it going today?
It's going great. I've had a great tour. How about you?
It's going great. Okay, so yes, as you said, we're here for a field day, and you gave a presentation about different varieties of barley, I believe.
Yep.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. There's a project here that's a kind of a one-year demo. It's got 3 different malt varieties. So that was Connect, Synergy, and Fraser. And then also 3 feed varieties. So Austenson, Claymore, and Oriana. Just looking at different nitrogen rates. There has been some research in the past too, because the varieties are newer. Some of the research was done on older varieties. So let's see what happens when we have newer varieties. So the trial was looking at plant growth regulators, fungicide, as well as nitrogen rate.
So talk about the treatments and what you guys found.
Okay. In some of the past research, it was found that Modus works best on with barley as compared to some of the other products. So then that was some Ag Canada research and a couple other different places. So that's what they went with for this trial. There is some shortening in the treatments that got the plant growth regulator. Not a lot. Unfortunately, it's been pretty dry and pretty hot, so everything is pretty short. But there is a visible difference there.
Okay, and what else did you find with some of the nitrogen trials?
Some of the nitrogen trials, they were looking at, this one specifically was a standard rate for Swift Current location of 100 pounds of nitrogen, and then a higher rate one, there's 125 pounds, and that's actual nitrogen per acre. Some previous studies has shown that if you have a newer variety like AAC Synergy, you can add about 40 pounds more nitrogen compared to AC Metcalf, and it actually uses nitrogen really well, but it doesn't bump up the protein. So the newer variety was doing better, and the protein wasn't going too high for malt specifications.
So why is this research important to farmers? Why should they be paying attention to this?
Anytime there's new varieties, I think you're getting better disease resistance, the lodging resistance. The ones here, we got a bit of differences in all of these different things, and the yield's improving. Every time there's a variety or few varieties released, there is an improvement there. So it is something that, maybe if you want to change varieties, it might be something, start small, do a little bit, and see what works on your farm. But it's definitely new information too, where you can get more yield from or more effective use for your nitrogen when a plant growth regulator would be useful because it's been dry here as a recommendation for a farm. It wouldn't be a good recommendation for this year, but for the trial, it's kind of the treatments that were there. And also just to make sure you know what fungicides are, how they're working.
If you have any feedback on anything you heard here today on RealAg on the weekend, maybe it's an update on some of your crops, some of the topics we discussed here today on equipment dealer consolidation, or what potentially could happen with biofuels and canola crush capacity in Western Canada. We'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call the RealAg feedback line. The number is 855-776-6147. Everybody enjoy the rest of your weekend. That's it for me, host Shaun Haney of Real Agriculture. That's a wrap on RealAg on the weekend here on 980 CGME and 650 CKOM.